buddy.
Hello, Miss Kelly. How are you?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. My day was a whirlwind today. And I missed you 2 weeks ago, but how was your fourth?
So the fourth was fun.
Yeah.
We spent some time with family, and
Mm-hmm.
and so that's been fun. But just
Do you have any
recently here,
fireworks?
oh yeah, there were lots of fireworks anyway going on. I think I just saved my money and sit back and watched them all around us. So oh yeah, it's very fun, but it's a little dry here in Texas, so there's been a bit of a burn ban. So
Yeah.
that was my scare is that. But
Yeah.
we had fun. Sadly, the other day though, in the family, I lost my uncle, my dad's brother,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
suddenly, and so I that really hit me hard. I love my uncle very much. He
Yeah.
was a mentor to me growing up in the fire service and meant so much to me and so many things as far as inspiration. So
Aw.
he's there with my father and brother and everyone else. So I I just know that he's in a better place than here. So
Yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
blessed. So
Oh.
speaking of very special things, I see some of our amazing folks
I
that
was
are
just
already
going to
joining us.
say, we see some
So
great names in the chat already. Hi,
so
everybody.
we got Bob, Robin, Peg, and
Welcome.
more to come. And
That's
we
right.
love you folks being here. Well, we've talked about it so much for the last, I know, probably easily couple of weeks. And I will tell you that the opportunity to get to have this man on this show is it's even just easily explaining it doesn't come that way.
Yeah.
Here is a person that other people who investigate look up to for
Mm-hmm.
credibility on evidence on so many things when you think
Yeah.
of this creature. And that's like that's a that's a tall task.
Yeah.
This man is loved. This man is respected.
I'm so excited.
People talk so much about the fact of, well, have you got to meet this man? And I say no, but I'm looking forward to it. So now getting to have him on the show, and when that day does happen, I'm going to travel somewhere to meet him. That's how much I respect him.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, you know who it is. Kelly knows who it is. Folks, we bring to the show from shows such as Finding Bigfoot, Expedition Bigfoot. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, and thousands of people across social media, we have the one, the only Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Welcome to the show.
All right.
Thanks. Boy,
See,
you set a high bar to live up to.
You can just replay that snippet over and over again. It's a great way to wake up in the morning. I think you should just record that and just like that hype. It could be your hype music early in the morning.
That's
Keith's
right.
introduction.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Oh,
I
thanks
hope
for joining us.
even half of that's true.
Well, we know it is because we hear from the people who have been out there and investigating, and they're like, this is something that we needed to run by this man. And you give another whole perspective of how you say, well, but look at it from this. Is this possible? And then you say, that's not possible. A man can't do that. So then what you're left with is these results. And so I'm just gonna be quiet because I'm excited. I'm going to let you.
That's very hard for him to do.
Yeah. I know. I'm so excited. What
me too. Yeah.
What a great guy. Just take us back from the beginning as to yourself and how you came on this beautiful journey that we've all followed so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's the standard opening question. And so if anyone out there has heard me speak, I hope it's not overly redundant. But let me just start with the near past, and that was I ended up in a career that was my sort of dream career of being a scientist. I didn't have many role models in the family. My relatives were all businessmen or doctors or things like that, but few really no acquaintances that were scientists, academics of some stripe, whether in academia or in industry, and so I didn't really know what a scientist did to make a living to pay the bills until I got to the university and learned of academia being one of those routes. And so I, was kind of pulled myself up by the bootstraps, you might say, and finally focused on what it was that most intrigued me. I mean, I was fascinated with human evolution, with primates, primate behavior, primate anatomy. And I didn't know how all that fit into a career package until I stumbled on physical anthropology. It was browsing through the stacks in the university library, as I was probably about a junior, I guess, at that point, and had thought I better start really getting serious about what I was going to do. And so, because of that, I can remember. I don't often tell this point, but I can remember when a particular paper came out in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology by the cohort of paleoprimatologists and paleoanthropologists, really, at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And it was entitled The Locomotor Anatomy of Australopithecus afarensis, commonly known as Lucy's species. And I was just fascinated by that. That was what I wanted to do, to be able to look at these fossilized bones and reconstruct the anatomy, the functional anatomy and behavior of these now extinct species. And especially, because Bigfoot obviously was rattling around in the attic there. The advent of bipedalism was the other common chord, the thread that sort of that I was either consciously or subconsciously following. And so I ended up in a career, pardon me, where I teach human gross anatomy, full cadaver dissection graduate level program for the health professions students in our institution here at Idaho State. But I do research into the evolution of human bipedalism from a variety of different perspectives. Since I don't have a real inside track into the primary fossils as they're uncovered, as they're dug up from the ground, you have to kind of bide your time until those primary discoverers publish their papers, and then you have a chance to come and critique and review and synthesize and so forth. But I also do, I've done everything from electromyographic studies of the function of muscles in humans and primates as they're walking and climbing. I've done all sorts of functional morphology, geometric morphometrics, and all types of different approach. Microstructure analysis of the soul pad in hominoids and humans, and all those things have direct bearing on many of the questions that we're asking about in our study of and attempts to interpret the footprint evidence for Sasquatch. So that was obviously, it was the footprint evidence. It was the example of some of my predecessors, like, John Napier, who was one of the first to write a book, first scientists rather, to write a book about Bigfoot and the Yeti. And he concluded that he was convinced there was something to the Sasquatch question. There's something out there leaving footprints. It was the footprints. He was in addition to being a primatologist, he was also a physician specializing in hands and feet. So there was a simpatico there in interests and emphases. And then Dr. Krantz was a very accomplished anatomist. And of course, he focused very precisely on footprints, and that was the argument that he made, was based on that footprint evidence. And so, I was sort of following in those footsteps, if you will, and so And so when I had the opportunity to actually witness a set of fresh tracks, it was so, I mean, the whole thing in retelling it, it's like, nah, that couldn't have happened like
Oh,
that.
let's hear.
It was just a string of events. It was, I was actually attending meetings, vertebrate paleontology meetings. I had just kind of broken into a paleontological project here in the Intermountain West, in the northern Rockies. It was a little bit of a different juncture for me, and I get this message from a colleague who had referred a producer to me, uh, wanting some expert evaluation of a video that was shot in Northern California. This became known as the Redwoods video, or sometimes more euphemistically, the Playmate video, because oh, now I just went blank on her name. Yeah, anyway, it'll pop back in my head, but in a minute here. But she, one of the hosts of this TV show, was a former Playboy Playmate. And so, of course, that, all sorts of Playmate meets Primate, Beauty and the Beast, And so it was with some trepidation that I accepted this invitation. But when I saw the video, I mean, I thought it would be just a fun exercise in debunking something, At this point, I was still fascinated by the question, but so much water had gone under the bridge, so much time had elapsed without any real advances that I was aware of, that I thought, well, this is fascinating, but it's probably nothing to it. Or if there ever was something, there is no longer. And so I thought, well, at the very least, this would be interesting. This would be fun, a fun exercise, and I can ply my craft, my comparative anatomy, and breaking down the video. And the more I looked at it, I couldn't find the proverbial zipper. And instead, I kept finding aspects of the anatomy, the way the foot pushed off as it stepped over the shoulder of the road into the trees, and there were other details of anatomy that have made this somewhat notorious, but and played right into the Playmate and Primate. It had a penile display. Let's be very anatomical here. That was just typical of a great ape. It looked, I mean, if you go to one of Diane Fossey's books about chimps of the Gombe, thumb through, and this is a behavior that chimps will use when they're agitated, when they're scared, when they're trying to intimidate one of their underlings, so there are ample examples of this anatomy, this display in some of her publications. And boom, you put it side by side with a frame grab from this video, and it's the same anatomy. And not typical human anatomy, but great ape, but in most similar in this regard to the chimpanzee. Anyway, the point being, the harder I tried to find the zipper, the more intriguing details and subtleties kept coming to the surface. And with doing the little sleuthing and dusting off the trigonometry and so forth, we were able to estimate a height of just under 8.5 feet. That was significant. I was quite confident that we had the opportunity then to go to the site and confirm that. There's a spot where it steps, like as I was mentioning earlier, it steps over the shoulder of the road, disappears into the redwoods there, and as it passes immediately behind this very distinctive tree trunk with a big burl at its base, there's a little knob. It could either be a knot, or it turns out it was a clump of moss, where the moss had grown very thick, and it had a very distinctive outline as seen in silhouette in this video. And once we were on the scene, there it was, and it took just simple maneuver to throw a tape up against that tree and confirm absolutely its head had just gone below that point, and that put it right between 8 and 8.5 feet in height. So depending on how you measured from the ground, which was kind of uneven there. So anyway, I mean, that put a whole new twist on it too. I mean, it's one thing for someone to to don a cheap off-the-shelf costume and run around at night, and scare the folks or one of their crew, stick one of their grips in a costume to liven up the plot a little bit. But to find someone who's over 8 feet tall to do that and add these details of anatomy that were so striking. So, this really set the wheels turning. And I'm going, maybe there is something to this. And so in the weeks that followed, I was visiting family, and the wives were going to go off shopping. I turned to my younger brother, who had also seen the Patterson-Gimlin film with me and my father back in 1968, 69 in Spokane, Washington. And so he'd also always harbored this interest, never had the opportunity as I've had to pursue it like I have. But I turned to him and I said, hey, because I obviously brought him up to speed on all this very interesting. This was the first time or one of the first times I'd ever been on camera, participating in one of these documentary spots. And so I was filling him in on this experience and the intrigue that I was feeling. And I said, hey, let's go take a weekend drive up to an overnight up to Pullman, Washington, and see if we can pay a visit to Dr. Krantz and see his cast, introduce myself, as a fellow physical anthropologist, and so on and so on. Anyway, the short of it was we did, and had a fabulous afternoon. Dr. Krantz was extremely hospitable, and he was actually quite tickled, quite intrigued by my interest and given my background and status and so forth. And so we had casts, spread out on the bench tops, and we were videotaping and asking questions. And he was whipping out some copies from the molds that he had, and that's how the collection began, actually, with those first contributions from Dr. Krantz. And so it was on the way home from that weekend. On Sunday, we were driving back down. The weather was a little inclement. It was in February. And I honestly can't remember the occasion why we were in Boise at the time visiting. But so I said, hey, rather than drive down through the Idaho highways, which on that side of the state are fairly rural, 2-lane highways, I said, and there were some bad road conditions. We'd seen a couple slide offs and so on. I said, hey, let's go down the freeway. We'll make a little detour over here. We'll go through Walla Walla, and we'll pop in on this Paul Freeman, who I had communicated with because of some other. I mean, see, there's even more. There's so many points of conversion. You pull on one thread and it teases apart. On the way home from the visit to the Redwoods, Richard Greenwell had handed me a copy of this newly published little booklet by Vance Orchard, who was a columnist, a very good columnist, who wrote this. I think it was Ramblin' Times, which was carried in quite a number of the regional newspapers there in southeastern Washington and northeastern Oregon. And he was fascinated by the question of Bigfoot. So frequently his columns would be about Bigfoot. And he knew Paul Freeman, he knew Wes Summer, he knew some of these characters, these personalities in the Walla Walla area who sort of were involved in investigations and so forth, collecting evidence. He'd written a little book, which was essentially a compendium of columns relating, through the years, over about a 10-year period, in fact, all strung together with, very, very nice narration and so on. So Greenwell hands me this book and says, Jeff, would you consider writing a book review of this for the Journal of the International Society of Cryptozoology? And so that had also kind of set the wheels in motion, because many of the characters and some of the evidence that was found figured very prominently in Dr. Krantz's book, given the proximity between Pullman and Walla Walla there in eastern Washington. And so in the process, or in the time leading up to this spontaneous sort of impromptu visit to Dr. Kranz's lab, I had been in contact with Paul Freeman in West Summerlin, and Vance Orchard. Got to know Vance. Vance was very generous in with his time, answering questions and providing a long list of contact information for all of the personalities that appeared in his book. So I had the chance to talk to these people firsthand, phone them up, and many of them shared some of their photographs and Kodachrome slides of footprints and things that they had witnessed in this area through this decade of time. And so all these things were on my mind. And so I had already a couple of times spoken with Paul Freeman, and fully anticipated that sometime in the future, February is a pretty iffy time to travel in the Northwest anyway. But once the weather had warmed up, then the intent was to go visit him. So this was kind of out of the blue, literally. And we first went to Wes Summerlin's house and met him and his wife. Pee Wee was her nickname. And saw he had a very fascinating collection of artifacts himself, and photo albums and so on. And again, was very generous with his time. When we left him, we just went straight over to Paul Freeman. There's no way he could have known that we were coming. I mean, he couldn't have, Wes couldn't have called him fast enough. It would have tipped his hand. But anyway, as we pull up to Paul's house, in drives Paul into the driveway in his pickup truck. So it was very fortuitous timing. He once he knew who I was, we introduced ourselves. He again invited me in, and we started chatting and so forth, and then retired to the basement where he started pulling out boxes of the casts stored in the closet there down in the den, and out come the casts, and we're spreading them out. And I had seen some of these at Dr. Kranz's lab, but I tell you, it's kind of like, I mean, the experience that I liken it to is if you've ever been panning for gold, and you're in that little that pan and swirling that around, and then that sometimes it's a nugget, sometimes usually it's just a little flake of gold catches the light. But there's a feeling about that experience, and the first time I was ever out actually digging fossils or prospecting for fossils of vertebrates down in the first time was up in southeastern Montana. I did eventually get to go to South America. But when you pick up a fossil, a preserved piece of an animal that was alive millions of years ago, realize that was part of a living organism. There's just something about that. Well, the distinction between looking at Kranz's copies versus here holding the originals, still had dirt, it still had bits of vegetation. There's almost, it's almost as if there's a spirit, an animation that it's part of that it was just, oh man, I was asking questions of, what about this? Did you notice this? And then after a few minutes, Paul says, well, gee, you obviously know a lot about footprints. He said, would you like to see some fresh tracks? I looked at my brother and I looked back at him. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, what I do is as soon as the snow melts off the foothills and the roads are passable, many of these tertiary roads are just graded dirt roads. They're not improved in the least. There's no gravel bed or nothing, which is why the tracking potential is so great. He drives these lower foothill roads and just watches for any tracks that cross or that flank the shoulder of the road. And he said, I just found the first examples of this season just this morning. He said, that's where I was coming back from when you pulled up. And I thought, oh, well, sure, why not? What what's there to lose? So we piled into we were riding in my brother's pickup truck, and we all piled into that and drove up there. Anyway, that was where the first set of tracks were observed. And it wasn't just, one spurious track in a mud puddle. there was this long line, 35, 45 tracks on this farm access road, this restricted access road that went off of the gravel road and out into the fields towards the canal. We were right up against the wooded foothills. In that part of the country, they cultivate even rather quite steep rolling hills right up to the national forest boundary. Some of these farms are situated such, and so it was stunning. I'm looking at these tracks, and he kept saying all the way up there, he kept saying, "Yeah, these aren't very good." He said, "I don't even." He said, "I've got so many, as you see, I've got so many casts. I won't even bother anymore unless they're really perfect." And I'm thinking, well, okay, let's see what does this mean? And all the things that he considered imperfections were the signs of animation. They were the dynamics where the toes had slid, or where there were pressure ridges or tension cracks, or it's just or where the toes had curled around a stone. Yeah, and it was just amazing. I'm sitting here, my slack jawed, asking myself, because I was still very skeptical. I was, I'd gotten an earful from a number of people, well-meaning and otherwise, that should watch out for Paul Freeman. He was a hoaxer, and so I was kind of keeping back a little bit reticent to buy into all this right off the bat. But I'm looking at this thinking, how did he do this? I mean, there's just no way he could have done this.
Right. Yeah.
And there was no sign. I mean, if you had fabricated, I mean, short of someone strapping on fake feet and literally stomping across the mud flats there and down across the fallow field with loose soil, so they were sinking in 2 or 3 inches, and then making a round and came back up, and because there was no sign of, his tracks from that earlier that morning were there. You could see where he walked down along partway, not all the way, as we later discovered, because we found tracks much more than what he showed us. So the hook was set, and I was being reeled in. And that's how it started. But like I said, so many things just serendipity. I often kind of point to it. I'm not a great fisherman. I enjoy fishing when the opportunity presents itself, but I have a kind of a short. Well, I don't want to say that. In some instances, not always, but in some instances, I have a short attention span, and I get when the point is I need to stay engaged. And so if I'm sitting there with the intent of catching a fish, if I don't catch a fish, I get restless and I have to pull up stakes and go look for greener pastures.
Another place. I'm the same way. Speaking of which, we've got some exciting people in this that are just already starting to push out the questions. Like,
we'll go right ahead. You bet. I told you get me started. You won't be able to.
Well, no, it's all
great. We love it.
We love it. Notice I was sitting there with my jaw. I just picked it back up.
I know. It's totally engrossed in what you were saying.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. I was wondering, this is Robin Kell. She's a sweetheart. I was wondering if you have heard about the family group of Bigfoot we have here in Salt Fork, Ohio. As if so, what do you think about that? There's supposedly this family group that is very common in an area that's just made themselves just part of that the territory there.
Well, and not to be a negative Nelly, but I offer a word of caution. The habitat around Salt Fork surely has lots of potential, but the occurrence of encounters, and you have to have a witness, obviously, to have an encounter, but the occurrence of encounters, the frequency of encounters, always goes up the weekend of the conference. Other activities.
I got
at
you.
Salt Fork Park. So my point being simply that some people get overly excited. Now, the staff at the park categorically deny that there's any salting of the mine or any shenanigans. But people get very excited. They read too much into what they see. When footprints are showing up right in the middle of the campground on the day of the conference, and they're only 10 inches long, and they have a little toe that's turned on its side because the person wears shoes. It's a human footprint, obviously. So I've not seen. I would be delighted to see some evidence of a resident population, which should be discernible based on repeat appearance of recognizable footprints. And we have numerous examples of where that was one of the first questions I asked as I got involved with this is if these creatures, if these creatures exist, they must be very rare. If they're as rare as I suspect they are, then when sign is witnessed repeatedly in a given geographical area, like Salt Fork, you should be able to recognize particular individuals. You should see repeat appearance of
Right.
one very few individuals who are recognizable. That's better stated. We're all our feet are distinctive enough. We've got enough parts, besides the raw proportions and size.
Right.
Those 5 toes can manifest themselves in quite a number of permutations, and so if I tell my students, if I took all your shoes and socks off and lined you up here across the front bench, we could pick out distinguishing characteristics that if we then had someone picked at random and left a trail of footprints across this trackway, we could figure out who it was. Same goes for the Sasquatch. So, just put out a challenge rather than shoot anybody's claim down. Just put out a challenge to demonstrate for me some repeat appearance of footprints of recognizable individuals.
So we got another great question from someone who is one of our great listeners. Bob Burnell asked the question that is on topic these days. What are your thoughts on Bigfoot being a multi-dimensional being? Also on the whole UFO connection of that.
Right. Well, again, my coming at it, there's no question that I may have certain biases given my frame of reference and background. I'll admit that possibility. But as a biologist, the fundamental question I'm testing is there a biological species behind the legend of Sasquatch? And all of the evidence I'm familiar with, and my predecessor, my contemporary, rather, now deceased, Dr. John Bindernagel, who did a fantastic job in his first book, North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. He navigated through the primatology literature and very deftly demonstrated the remarkable convergences in so many anatomies and behaviors between Sasquatch and other known great apes, that Sasquatch clearly fits in that group, that superfamily of the hominoids, and that is a sufficient explanation. Neither he nor I have ever experienced anything that would lend credibility to the claims of multi-dimensional travel, portals, shape-shifting. And I know that people lay claim to those experiences, but they remain subjective until such time as anyone can put up concrete evidence or good photographic documentation. And so far, in my experience, that's been wanting. So, in science, I approach this, and this is a qualification again for that position. In science, there's an often misused, misapplied axiom called the Occam's razor, or parsimony, and that has been misstated or conflated to the point where it's I get on my little bully pulpit once in a while, but it's often expressed as the simplest explanation is most likely to be true, and that's not what Occam said. Occam was a philosopher of science. The traditional approach to science was the principle of falsification. That is, you can't experience all possible scenarios. You can't prove something with absolute certainty. But what you can do is try to look for an exception to your hypothesis. If you can show just one contradiction, which is a lot, well, not always, but maybe much more readily attainable, then that knocks the legs out from underneath your hypothesis. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and come up with a little more elaborate explanation. Well, the idea is that the original expression of it is that you should not unnecessarily add factors to your hypothesis. So you're obligated to start with the simplest until you can show that that's insufficient, that that's wrong.
Right.
So my null hypothesis is Sasquatch is a biological entity that has everything in common with the natural world, the normal world, that every other critter out there that we're more familiar with does. And until you can falsify that with credible substantive evidence, you're not justified to make that leap. Just because we haven't solved the question, that in and of itself doesn't justify appealing to extraordinary claims. Now, as far as UFOs, I mean, we don't know what UFOs are. I mean, there's been this flurry of interest with the Navy's acknowledgement and the government's acknowledgement that there are unidentified objects. They haven't tipped their hand if they are in possession of knowledge of just what they are. And so again, to make the leap of correlating one observation with in most instances that I'm familiar with, they're totally independent observations. I mean, I don't know of anyone who has seen a Bigfoot step out of a UFO into the woods. And why would it always be in the woods? Why don't we have a UFO land in the baseball field in Central Park and step out, you know?
So another great question that's come up is with actual, hands-on evidence, and it's Eastern Cryptid Encounters. Hey, Jeff, did you get to examine the Bigfoot skull from Coyote Peterson?
Oh, I thought we'd nipped that in the bud, because that's the fellow who claimed he was up in British Columbia and uncovered a skull. Well, it was clearly a publicity stunt. I mean, from the get-go, it was obvious that what he had was almost certainly a replica of a lowland gorilla skull.
Okay.
That you can get online from any of a number of sources.
Okay.
And it has been stained in the dirt and buried. And
so we'll mark that
off. Yeah. I mean, apparently
he's like, check, I'm not that one.
They weren't in class that day. But another great question is, I'm curious if you have had any experiences with the DNA samples, environmental DNA that points to chimpanzee species linked to Bigfoot, such as what was discovered in the highlands of Kentucky Appalachians.
Yeah, there's another one. This is based on the claims from Expedition Sasquatch, I assume. Dr. Maria Mayor. Well, the short of it is simply the hair samples were lifted from her backpack, which she had with her in the field in Africa when she was studying chimpanzees.
Oh. Well, see there? That's what good investigation does when it finally.
Unfortunately, well, it's behind the scenes kind of it. Unfortunately, I don't think that that the series has issued any disclaimer or addendum correcting the impression that was left that they had something that was similar to chimpanzee.
Yes, absolutely. Tracy asks, do we have a guess as to their longevity?
Well, yes, a guess is probably the best word. We have indirect evidence. For example, going back to this notion of repeat appearance of recognizable individuals. In 1958, you've got that photo of Jerry Crew, that classic photo of him holding up a footprint cast, this big 16, almost 17-inch cast. We have examples of that same individual. That was 1958, 1964 or 63. There's a little controversy over the date in the record keeping. Roger Patterson made a couple of casts actually, from a trackway that was from that same individual. There was another, example cast by Bob Titmus, Heimbom, that was that same individual. So we've got a 10, 15-year span of this adult in that region. And there are other examples. Cliff Barrickman does a great presentation where he takes this theme that I talked about, this notion of recognizable individuals, and he applies it to the very large track sample that has come out of the blues. And he's gone through, for example, there are a couple individuals who are seen, more than a dozen times their footprints have been documented. And with enough variation under the circumstances in toe position and so forth, and depth and distortion and whatnot, that many people haven't even recognized. I had the same problem when it was actually 2 or 3 examples of this series that he extended considerably through his sleuthing. But I had shown, well, look, these are the same individuals, and people would look at it and say, no, you're crazy. I said, no, look at the toes. Look at the toe segments, and this individual has a distinctive big toe with a very large distal pad and rather long. The toes are no longer skeletally, but they have less webbing between their toes, which gives the impression of very long toes. So let me think now. Where did we start this? Oh, their longevity, their lifespan. So, a large primate like that would conceivably have a period of development that would be similar to other great apes, which is a little more accelerated than it is in humans. Our brain takes a lot of energy, and its postnatal growth kind of monopolizes the intake of calories. So our head grows really fast, and it takes a while. That's why little toddlers look so funny. They look like little gorillas walking around, because their hind limbs haven't caught up yet with the rest of their body, and because that kind of comes along later. So with that illusion, with that reference, I think it's reasonable to bracket. Now, again, this is coming at it with the notion that, as Dr. Bindernagel said, Sasquatch is North America's great ape. Whether it's an ape or an early hominin, we're splitting hairs there. We can talk about that more later. But so within that clade of the hominoids, the superfamily Hominoidea, which includes us and the great apes, and in fact the lesser apes, but the lifespan is pretty similar from orangs to chimps to gorillas to humans. Now, we've extended ours considerably through modern health and health care and nutrition, but you'd only have to go back a couple hundred years, and the typical lifespan for Homo sapiens was 45 to 55, and that's pretty typical for chimps and gorillas, for example, in the wild. The oldest gorilla for the longest time was Gorgeous the gorilla, who died at the Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake when she was 62. Now, just recently, there's a female gorilla that has exceeded that. They're just recently, in fact, I posted on my Facebook page, they had a birthday party for her, and I think she's in the German zoo, 65 years old. 65 years old in captivity. Now, that adds a bit. I mean, you've got veterinary care, it's kind of like humans. You've got health care and good nutrition,
Right.
So that tends to extend things. But there is also, the only other factor added to that is there is a positive correlation with longevity and increase in body mass. So large animals like elephants and so forth, mammals, stay within mammals, live to be longer than small, tiny mammals like a shrew or a mouse. I mean, even mid-sized animals, bears, for example, American black bear lives to be 20 or 25 years old.
I knew by being a big guy I was going to live longer, but I
Well,
got a really a really pushing question here, and this is why I want to get into, because I'm a tech guy part of the show, as you see. I want to ask about what's your thoughts on the LiDAR technology, this new laser. It's I mean, I was amazed by it, of how precise they can get. And even with one of the creatures that they believe that they saw quickly on the show, as it was by a tree somewhere, and then they went in and they showed how it just down to the each little dimension broke that down, and was like, so what's your thoughts on this technology?
So you're describing something else on Expedition Sasquatch?
Yes, so it was the one that, and I know Robin saw it, and I kept some of those photos because I was like, look at it.
Yeah.
It's finally getting technology marries with Bigfoot. And
well, that's exciting.
And I tell you,
I have to admit, I don't have cable TV, and so I don't keep up with these on a regular basis. It's very, very irregularly that I get to see one of the episodes when I'm traveling, or when someone points something out to me, or when something gets posted on YouTube or something. But I had been inquiring into the use of LiDAR. I was both intrigued but disappointed in season 1 anyway. I did see the premiere episode when they mapped out their potential study, or their intended study area, and they could identify even game trails,
right,
due to the difference in texture and so forth. But then they didn't pursue the potential applications of LiDAR. So I made inquiries into several companies, and was very open about the motivation of my interests. They were quite intrigued as well, but the word I got was that the technology, the resolution, the resolving ability was not quite there yet. But they said it will be soon. They were reassuring that it wouldn't be too long a wait before, yes, you could use LiDAR to pick out large animal objects as well in the environment. So that the prospect of that's very exciting, because the frustration with currently available commercial grade thermal is it doesn't have the penetrance
correct
pass through the forest canopy, especially the dense forests, of the western states, the coniferous forests.
Correct.
So I'm told by some people who are in the know that they use, they're in the military, that they could say only that they use thermal imaging that can penetrate, and they,
Well, once you watch that, Dr. Meldrum, I will tell you, it is like, now that's intriguing, because you got a tech guy with this, the technology, he's trained, he knows this, and he's like, look, I'm here for the investigation. I don't add anything to it. I don't pull anything away. I'm strictly doing my job. And when he got that, and he goes, wait a minute, what's this? And they go, oh! And they literally were like, look, and that's because this creature, as we all well know, is so smart about being able to be invisible to us, and yet be in plain sight, we're right there, and they know just to not move. The only thing that gets them caught sometimes is that smell. And I've smelled that smell in East Texas, and it wasn't a skunk.
Yeah.
But that's why that one particular program was so amazing. I was like, yes. So
well, I'll have to look into that then, because that has been on my radar to.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. To keep my finger on the pulse of that, and see what developments might be forthcoming, because I mean, even the short there were two shortcomings of the aerial approach, and that was multi-copter technologies did not have this sufficient airtime to really execute systematic grid pattern type searches.
Right.
They were flying for kind of reactionary or just scouting operations to see, instead of climbing up to the head of that canyon, you just fly your drone up and take a quick flyby and see what the potential is up there. But the payload was also limited, and the ability of thermal imaging to penetrate in closed canopy settings was just was not very promising. So this is exciting to hear. Yeah.
The one that he had literally was the Airbus A380 stretch of aircraft. I mean, it was the limousine. I mean, it was the one. I mean, when it took off, it even had and he went in and just did a huge grid, and then was able to document that evidence, and was so very cool.
So what they have was it like a still snapshot? I mean, because it does the flyover and then just knits together the data.
Right. So when he started the grid and went out and was basically doing looping as far as it would go, and then went back and made another pass to the other, and east and north and south. In one of these, he looks and he sees the things that he knows is normal, that he normally documents in his footage. And when he sees this, he goes, wait a second, what's this? And then the team goes, whoa. And they were like, what? And he was like, he's out there, and he gave an estimate of space. But of course, as you well know, at the time that you start in that direction of any type, that creature is onto it. Which brings me to a good question, and this is a one that they're asking. So with all this tech, can't more cameras be set up and able to detect these animals such as Bigfoot?
Well, sure they could, if you've got the means and the financing and personnel and the time. That's always I've had some luxury that isn't available to all people, because as an academic, I'm on a 9-month contract. I have I mean, it's not like I have my summers off. I still am conducting research, writing projects, and when I could, I was going out in the field for at least a month at a time. And but still, and I was fortunate enough to have attracted a number of philanthropic funding sources that helped to underwrite a lot of the field research and the equipment that we utilized. But still, it's always an ongoing challenge keeping up with the tech. It changes quickly, and even from one year to the next. And you're always hesitant even to buy things in preparation for the upcoming season, because 2 months down the road, you might think, oh, why did I buy that? It's obsolete already. I had an experience like that with some audio recording equipment when we got interested in trying to document the acoustic landscape and see if we could detect sources of infrasound vocalizations. And but the equipment, very kind of broke the mold. There was no precedent. They made an exception for me. The Cornell Bioacoustics Lab sold me one of their autonomous recording units.
Wow!
But by the next summer, but it was very way back on the curve of development. And so it was so antiquated. When you recorded 12 hours of recording, you had to sit there for 12 hours and listen to it play back. There was no means for filtering and scanning and looking at large data sets in a very rapid fashion. So and as a result, by the next field season, they were no longer supporting that system with software or anything. They offered me a discount, a trade-in discount, because they could analyze some of the components. But I mean, you've got to stay on top of that. this is the problem. I can only wear so many hats.
I know how you feel. I often
Yeah.
make those statements as well.
I get to really stay on top of that technology. You've got to be immersed in it and be doing it all the time, and to become proficient in understanding. And I have very little background in electronics, and so just some of the basic manipulation of components and so forth of these things that aren't off the shelf. They're off the lab bench.
Aw.
But there are people, and this is, it's important. I try to observe division of labor principles, and so there, David Ellis of the Olympic Project is kind of the go-to guy now for bioacoustics. And when I get something, I send it to him. I don't try to do, even though I have done research in DNA sequencing in the past and have done sequencing of my own. I don't undertake it. You have to have a working lab that is up to speed, and it's pricey. It's challenging to.
Let me tell you how pricey it is. My tech room is in the back of the house. Well, I'm gonna share with you that we've only just barely scratched a little bit of some of the information. And I guess, obviously, as you well know, where we are in the world of Bigfoot and the field and studies and the research is as you well know. But having people like you out there to have that credibility police to be able to say, you really got to look at this from another side. I'm so blessed because, to be honest, and this is the truth, we don't have that as much per se in the paranormal world. We're not backed by institutions of education. We don't have per se a scientist that comes, so at least with the world of Bigfoot and the studies thereof, you have very credible people like yourself. And that's why I have so much respect and admiration for you. Even myself, of my years of study in fire and being a paramedic, I graduated from the National Fire Academy and wrote 3 templates on the national level for safety. So I understand about the research and the things you do to do that. So that's why we want to hear how do we get to go and get to see Dr. Jeff Meldrum? Where are you going to be, and tell us how to get a hold of you.
Oh, well, I guess for the general term, it's simply my Facebook page. I don't have which is under my full name, Don Jeffrey Meldrum. I don't have a website per se, and I've been lately. It's funny, how your YouTube feed is. As soon as you look at one particular topic, then the AI keeps kicking more and more examples. So I happened to click on one of my old presentations, and just in the last few days, tons and tons of the old ones have been popping up, and I've been shoving some of those that I may have missed in the past or that were some time ago onto my Facebook page, because people enjoy seeing those, especially if they don't have access to some of the conferences. I speak frequently at conferences. In fact, this week I'm on my way out to Gatlinburg, to Tennessee, to do a presentation out there at the conference. And there are several more scattered about. Vernal, Utah in the second week of September. There's going to be one here. Brandon Tennant is organizing a small event here in Pocatello it's the 3rd or 4th weekend of September. There'll be some announcements forthcoming. So I try to post those on my Facebook pages as the details become confirmed, and that's the best way to keep your finger on that pulse. But also the Relic Hominoid Inquiry. I edit along with an editorial board of other PhDs who behind the scenes are quite intrigued by this. I edit an online scholarly journal, and we're now going into our 12th year. And it's easy to find. Just Google the Relic Hominoid Inquiry. Relic with a T, RELICT, Hominoid Inquiry. And it has all sorts of original research, reviews, essays, book reviews, essay-style book reviews. So in-depth book reviews is good to give you insight into potential purchases or to help you with if you're slogging through the more scholarly contributions that are out there. And it's a great way to kind of stay on top. There's a lot of translated historical documents. Mary Jean Coughlin's work on the Almaty in the Caucasus is featured there, and lots of other interesting things. So that's another good way to get your feet wet in some of the literature.
You have so many people in the chat that are it's just all words of love. We love you, Dr. Meldrum. It's so nice of you to come on the show and get to be that person that we have these questions. And I can assure you that even from this, because this can be seen again, people do that if they work and will continue to be seen. But I do know that myself and many other people are excited to get to go to one of these events and get to, to sit with you, possibly even break bread and just, listen to you, because it's so informative. And I'm just one of those people. I absorb it. I just absorb it. And what an honor. And I've met a lot of, in the fire service all over the world, I've met a lot of intriguing people, but you're one that is, who would you like to meet? And I say who that is, and they go, well, who is that? And then I tell them, they go, oh, that's him. That's him. And I say, yes, that's him. So I'm looking forward to it very much. Do you have a minute to just hang out in the green room backstage? We've got like something to drink and cookies or something if you want to. We're going to close out the show.
You betcha. That's fine.
We'll be with you in a minute.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, how intriguing. I feel like my brain, I'm processing all of what he was saying. It's fascinating. We have to get to an event that he's at.
We have to. It's a given. I feel like a little geeky nerd there, just sitting there, just watching, front row watching and just listening. But here's a man that just, that oozes that knowledge of a field that we're also intrigued by. And nice to have somebody there that's really got the pulse on things and really kind of spot checking things to say, no, that's not the case. And but you know what? That's good to have, because then what we're left with is, if this man puts a stamp on something to say, after all my time and all my investigation, I can tell you this was probably not a human making those tracks. Or then what is it left to be with. So anyway, folks.
I mean, thank you all for your questions. I tried to keep up with all of them. There were one or two maybe that we didn't, were kind of answered a little bit. So if you didn't get an answer to your question, feel free to send Dr. Meldrum a message on Facebook to ask your question directly, as he suggested to contact him. But I tried to get to the ones that we could in the time, and hopefully that answered as many as possible. But so next time.
Yes.
Next show.
Yes.
Buddy.
Yes.
We get to chat about some of our paranormal experiences.
Okay, cool.
But we also have some guests coming on to share their paranormal experiences.
Yes, we do.
So if you would like to guest on that show, just do a little cameo and tell us about an experience you had or something we only ask that it was something that either happened to you directly or that you were along in the situation. So you were there too, to come on for just a couple minutes and share your story, because this is all leading up. We have some big events coming up. We have some really fun things coming up. And so this is kind of a kickoff to all of that season and that paranormal Christmas season that goes into the fall time. So make sure that if you're interested in coming on and sharing your story, just send us a message so that we know, and we can get you the link to the show and join us for a few minutes and share your story. But I can't wait to share. So you and I've had a lot of really interesting experiences over the course of time. And maybe even we'll have some people come on and share their story about an encounter with Bigfoot or UAPs or anything that has to do with metaphysical, paranormal, supernatural communities. So make sure you come on and share.
We're excited about that. And so, let us know. Get with us ahead of time. and reach out to us so we can make this show as special as we're wanting it to be, as you well know. But we thank you for coming on tonight. We thank you for getting to hear this amazing man. And we're going to be back in 2 weeks. But just know that we do and love support you out there. Myself and Kelly stay very busy, but we do talk to many of you often, and we do have love and support for you. And if we don't always tell you that, well, we're telling you now. So
we're telling you now.
Just tell you, okay? So remember, we love you. 2 weeks. We'll be back.
2 weeks. Yep, we'll be back. Get ready. If you want to hop on with us for the next show, send us a message.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.